Welcome, everyone, again to the Rendanheyi Research Center in Silicon Valley, and our very last webinar before the summer vacation. The center, as many of you now know, was established in 2020 with a mission to act as an innovation platform for the creation of and distribution of the latest in management for the digital and now sustainable age. To do this, we apply a 360-degree approach and consider new management innovations in strategic management, in leadership, in transformation of corporate culture, organization design, and people. So how you move your company from A to Z. And we also touch on new approaches to R&D and innovation, also on supply chain management, customer experience management. And this is part of our 360-degree as of now. We also invite other experts to our platform. If you believe that you have the latest, and it's based on academic research and true practical cases with great data, you're welcome to contact us, and you might be also part of the platform. Today, the focus is on innovation in strategic management, and we turn to business people and academics in the field of boards or board work, executive leadership, corporate strategy work, and people working with transformation. And the presenter of today's session is Professor David Teece, which is very special to me and a friend. David Teece is the professor in global business and the director of the Tusher Center for Management of Intellectual Capital at the University of California, Berkeley. He also holds 8 honorary doctorates. Sorry for my Swedish origination. Professor Teece has published hundreds of research articles and dozens of books. The article on dynamic capabilities as a new strategic management framework was the most cited article in economics and business globally for 10 years. So for anyone that knows anything about research, you can just imagine how hard that is to become the most cited research article for 10 years straight in economics and business. In parallel with this, Professor Teece has also established and built an international company, Berkeley Research Group. And it focused on expert services and consulting. It's an expert services and consulting firm headquartered in California. So let us now take part of Professor David Teece's ideas on why a new strategic framework is needed for boards and executives and what it means more in detail. And I also want to pinpoint that please note that Professor Teece is offering an absolutely unique course, an online course on October 18th and 19th this year, in which you can spend time with Professor Teece for hours directly and discuss your own concerns or situation and get his advice, and also learn much more on dynamic capabilities. Today we just touch on it. You will be getting the link to sign up for the course if you want to sign up later. It's also in the chat already now in the very beginning. And I should warn you that it's an exclusive group. It will not be a big group. So you better sign up fast, because at a certain number, we will close the gate. And with that, I would like to share my screen and start the presentation here and leave the word over to you. There we are, David Teece.
Thank you very much, Annika. And if you can move to the first slide, I want to point out the obvious, which is that the business environment is changing dramatically. But what doesn't automatically happen is the way we manage or we think about management doesn't happen often as quickly as the business environment changes. And most of the models of management that we're familiar with have been developed over the last 50 years, when the world environment and the regulatory environment and the technological environment has been relatively stable. But all of those things are now changing. Globalization, which has been on the march for over 50 years, is at minimum stalled. Some people think it's going backwards. But we have a very connected global economy, and as a result, what happens anywhere impacts other people everywhere. This has also been accompanied with a decline in the rule of law. The rule of law brought stability to the global system, but as China, Russia, other countries challenged the rule of law and the governance arrangements of the post-World War II period, there's a new business environment that companies must accept. And we have a quote here from the former Secretary of State of the United States, George Shultz, where he says, "We created a global economic system, a secure global economic system, and it's now coming apart." That was in 2019, before the pandemic and before the Ukraine. And now you have actually a quite similar statement from Vladimir Putin saying new powerful centers have formed on the planet. We're talking about revolutionary changes. We're talking about revolutionary changes in the entire system of international relations. And I might add that technology is, of course, on the march, and many of the ways in which we do business are changing. So don't be surprised by the fact that we need new mental models. And I've been developing a new mental model that I call dynamic capabilities. Next slide, please, Annika.
Yes.
And this concept of dynamic capabilities got started because I live here in Silicon Valley, where Annika is as well. And we've been aware of the deep uncertainty and the rapid change in the business environment, primarily driven, of course, by new technologies, but it could also be driven by geopolitical factors. But if you're in a world of rapid change, then you need a new mental model. And I've, together with actually a couple of my graduate students, Gary Pisano and Amy Schuin, I've come up with this concept that I call dynamic capabilities. And to define it, I provided the following. Dynamic capabilities is the ability of an organization and its management to integrate, to build and reconfigure internal and external competences to address rapidly changing environments. Note what it doesn't say. It didn't say about management's about being efficient. It's about integration. It's about building. It's about reconfiguring. So in rapidly changing or dynamic environments, there's a hint right there in the definition that it's not about efficiency and optimization and all the things that you may read about in the textbook. It's about a different class of activities that you've got to be really good at to stay agile and to succeed. Next slide, please. This has resulted in a change in thinking amongst strategic management scholars. If you go back to the 80s, the framework that was most popular was that was created by Michael Porter at the Harvard Business School, which was called the Five Forces framework. And the basic idea there was that competitive advantage at the enterprise level flowed from your ability to figure out what an attractive industry was and to go and find an attractive industry and invest behind entry barriers. You always had to, of course, be looking over your shoulder to make sure that there weren't new competitors coming into the marketplace, but it was a rather simple story about building competitive advantage through being in good industries. Well, today we don't even know what an industry is, with big tech industry boundaries between, say, television and the internet. I mean, these boundaries are long gone, and digitization just blows apart traditional industry structures. Five Forces was replaced by a resource-based theory of the firm. That's what I say there. That's what I mean by RBV. And the idea there was to build competitive advantage by having some difficult to replicate asset. And that's indeed important. But what the difficult to replicate asset, the valuable difficult to replicate asset is today, may be different from the one that's relevant tomorrow. So the resource-based approach was insightful, but rather too static. And that led me to generate this concept of dynamic capabilities, which puts much more emphasis on innovation. It puts great emphasis on what I call asset orchestration, or the ability of management to be able to redeploy assets and reconfigure assets, and to actually shape the business environment. In this framework, you don't take the business environment as given. It's something that you try to shape in one way or the other. Next slide, please, Annika. The essence of this is the claim that with deep uncertainty, you need a new way of thinking about management. And in this framework, innovation is paramount. And that should not surprise you, given that this model is developed in Silicon Valley. But even though innovation is something that's core to Silicon Valley, it's really core everywhere. Any place that's open to some degree to international commerce is going to feel the effects of innovation. Innovation is paramount. Efficiency and associated metrics take the back seat. So you've often heard about best practices, and some people think that management is just about pursuing best practices. Well, I want to tell you that's not true. You can go out of business pursuing best practices. What you need is an entrepreneurial approach, not just in a small firm environment, but in a big firm environment. And it's not just about agility either. You need strategy. There's an enormous number of books that you can pick up in the airport bookstore and elsewhere that says that, well, because of all this deep uncertainty, you've got to be agile. But that's not enough. To be agile in what way? To do what? You know, you still got to figure out what businesses you want to be in and what new products you want to develop. Being agile is certainly a piece of it, but it's not really enough to get you through. Strategy is critical. And you also need a sense of urgency. Speed of execution matters. Next slide, please, Annika. So we can think of dynamic capability. It's a very complicated framework, to tell you the truth, but I've figured out how to simplify it. And if you click on the next button, please, Annika, the next two buttons, there are really three buckets of activities, three sets of processes that firms really need to be good at if they want to have strong dynamic capabilities. First of all, they need to be good at what I call sensing and sense making. We all look at the same business environment, but we often understand it differently. You need to understand what's happening to consumers, what's happening to the competition, what's happening to technology, what's happening geopolitically. You need to be fully aware of all those developments, but you also need to be able to make sense of all of that and figure out what it means for corporate strategy. But once you've figured it out, you've got to act on it. It's not enough to invent new things. You then have to invest behind them. It's not enough to pick up on important trends. You have to adjust to them. So this ability to execute, to mobilize resources, to deliver value and shape markets is another important cluster of things you need to be good at to have strong dynamic capabilities. And even if you get these two things right, if you're able to figure out which way the future is going, and if you're able to invest behind it, Steve Jobs, for instance, was really extremely good at figuring out the opportunity for a new type of digital device and really completely upend the mobile phone business. But if you don't invest behind it, you go nowhere. And then even if you get it right, the markets are changing so rapidly. You have to be in the business of constantly renewing and transforming because of deep uncertainty and change. So these classes of activities really the core of the dynamic capabilities framework. along with strategy. Next slide, please, Annika. Now, a lot of textbooks in strategic management would like you to believe that strategic management is like playing chess. Well, in a tiny way it is, but the problem with the chess metaphor is that it suggests stability. You know, the rules of chess change maybe once every 200-300 years, but the rules in the marketplace change every day. And as the rule of law is weakened, they change in ways that is very uncertain. So chess is no longer a good metaphor. That's a good metaphor for the industrial economy. And I used to actually think that the orchestra, or just, you know, the role of the conductor in symphony orchestra was a good metaphor, but I've come to understand it's not, because once again, a lot of things about the symphony orchestra don't change. The type of instruments are relatively stable and have been so for many years. Better metaphor is jazz, or actually mixed martial arts. Let's just focus on jazz. That's about improvisation and the ability to collectively improvise but still play a really nice tune. And mixed martial arts, of course, there are very few rules. And that's really a great analogy. You clearly have to be agile, and you've got to be thinking about what to do, what repertoire of blows or kicks to deliver at any point in time. So the metaphor for today, for management today, is perhaps mixed martial arts. You know, take that on board for a while and see if it helps you. Next slide, please. Now, and let's populate that, please, Annika. There's another concept out there that my good friend and colleague, Henry Chesborough, has developed called open innovation. And some of you probably have heard of that. One, like dynamic capabilities, it's a framework that has received a lot of attention. And it basically says that the way to move ahead is to engage in open innovation, which is not that you rely on other people for your innovation, but you recognize the fact that you have to supplement your own creative forces and capabilities with that which is external to the business enterprise, and find partnerships and relationships that enable you to draw more innovation into the firm. And indeed, that's part of dynamic capabilities. These are very complementary ideas. They're not competitive ideas. And open innovation is a concept that I embrace inside of dynamic capabilities. So think of dynamic capabilities, if you will, as an organizing framework, as a meta framework that helps you figure out the things that are important for management today. Next slide, please. And this is not just a set of ideas that I've worked out in academia. I'd like to think of dynamic capabilities as actually the distillation of what great companies in Silicon Valley do. And you find actually executives, while they don't know the language of dynamic capabilities as it exists in the scholarly world, if you are careful, you'll see many of the great companies and many of the great executives using language that's very consistent with dynamic capabilities. And here is a quote from Rendanheyi. She was the CEO of Pepsi in the late 20s. I don't think she is anymore. But she puts it this way. When she was made the CEO, she said she had a choice. She could have gone pedal to the metal, stripped out costs, and delivered strong profits for a few years, and then said adios. And that's what a lot of managers do. They think the job of management is about efficiency and cutting costs. And, you know, sometimes that's necessary, but you can't cut costs as a way to greatness. It's maybe necessary in order to create the opportunity for investment for the future, but it's investment for the future that creates great companies. It's not pursuing mere efficiency criteria. And she goes on to say but that wouldn't have yielded long-term success. And what then would have yielded long-term success? She said, well, I articulated a strategy to the board focusing on the portfolio. We needed to build the muscles. We needed to strengthen the capabilities we needed to develop. And basically, she said, we went on to develop new products. But she uses the language of capabilities, in fact, in a very loose way, but it's very consistent with my framework called dynamic capabilities. And indeed, dynamic capabilities is what you need for long-term success. So efficiencies are important, but they deserve a back seat in this framework, and they're given a back seat. Next slide, please, Annika. Now, I don't have to go very far to find other statements. Here we have Jeff Bezos from Amazon saying, there are decisions that can be made by analysis. Unfortunately, there's this whole other set of decisions you can't ultimately boil down to a math problem. Many of us in academia think that optimization and efficiency algorithms and setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, whatever it is the secret sauce for great management, and it's not. As Bezos points out, most of the things that you need to be a good manager are not the tools of the engineer, they're not the tools of the economist, they are the tools of management, and in particular, they're the tools of strategic management. And here you have Tim Cook, of CEO, trying to explain what Apple's secret sauce is. And he says, Apple has the ability to innovate and create magic. This isn't something you can just write a check for. That's something you build over decades. And I believe the magic he's referring to is dynamic capabilities, the ability to innovate. And if you actually read the rest of the interview, he goes on to point out that it's also about integrating software, hardware, and services. So it's integration, it's capability enhancement, it's the ability to both create value and capture value, which is important. And the top executives know that very well. Next slide, please. And here we have Chairman Zhang at Hire saying things that are very consistent with dynamic capabilities. Remember, I said that dynamic capabilities is a framework that enables you to pull everything together. It's a meta framework. And that's consistent with what Chairman Zhang is saying. He says, we tend to look at things from a holistic perspective. So we are applying traditional holistic thinking to our management. So in many ways, dynamic capabilities is quite a natural way for managers to manage. But sadly, it's not what we teach in business schools, although that may be changing as well. Next slide, please. At Hire, of course, there's a concept that has helped galvanize action, which Chairman Zhang calls Rendanheyi. And in my view, Rendanheyi is really the essence or the key foundation for the dynamic capabilities of that company. And of course, the elements of that are as follows. The micro enterprises are very entrepreneurial and very good at identifying, developing, and seizing new market opportunities. They're very self-organized. So there, remember, we had dynamic capabilities is about sensing and seizing. And he's hit the nail on the head right there by pointing out that really what they've got is an organizational structure that's highly decentralized, that enables people and managers in the enterprise to understand users' problem, to sense, and then to seize. And indeed, Hire has been very innovative and is now, I think, the largest white goods company in the world. One more slide, just to wrap this up. Sensing, seizing, transforming. I think you can see all of that in the Rendanheyi model. Sensing comes from engagement with the customers. Seizing comes from the fact that decision-making is decentralized, so you don't have to go up through a chain of authority to get something done. The folks that are close to the market and close to the customer have the autonomy to do what's necessary. So they get the agility by simplifying the decision-making process. And that comes, of course, through having smaller enterprises or smaller micro enterprises under a larger umbrella. And then, of course, always transforming and shifting. So I'll just point out that if you're interested in the Rendanheyi concept, and of course you all are, then I think there's a natural affinity between dynamic capabilities and Rendanheyi, and I've discussed that directly with Chairman Zhang, and we both agree. Annika, I think there's maybe, that's the end of the slideshow. So perhaps you have a few questions.
Absolutely, I have. So we don't really have much time for questions, but I do want to ask one specific question to you, Professor Teece. I mean, if I wouldn't be me right now, I would have signed up for this course immediately because I know your work and I know how many years I tried to reach you before I actually one day met you. You are not an easy man to get hold of. You are very famous in your field. You're almost like, I usually use the analogy like the Pope in the field of management, business management. So here we have a course coming up where you can, for a very decent price, attend a number of hours with you directly. But why should you attend the course? I think that is maybe the only and most important question to answer. Why would you attend the course on October 18th and 19th together with you?
Well, let me try and answer that. I started off by saying the world is changing dramatically. So you need management models that are both help you understand how to make decisions in a rapidly changing world, but you also need a management model that is in some sense usable and simple enough that you can get your hands around it and you can understand what other elements of the business may require. It's always difficult in management to figure out priorities. And I think dynamic capabilities get you laser focused on what's important. And there's so much that clutters the agenda of business every day. You know, yes, there are things that you have to do to get the job done, but you must also do so with a deep understanding of what's really important. And I think dynamic capabilities will enable you to prioritize because there's always too much work to be done. And so you need to know what's really critical and what you can either delegate or forget about.
Right. And I think the framework, as you said, the sensing, seizing, and transforming is very applicable. I've used it several times myself in a CEO position and two CEOs, you know, to simulate what you need to do with your organization to sense better, what you need to do in order to seize better, what you need to do in order to be able to transform better. You can actually use a framework in a very, I think, applicable way to find out exactly where your gaps are. And you can start your transformation process. I have several companies that have done it. They started their digital transformation by using this framework. So it's absolutely applicable and very interesting. And I think many still don't know about it. I hope that you all will sign up to the course. As I said, it will be a small group. We will not allow too many people because we want a high interaction. So with that, the time is out, and thank you, Professor David Teece. I cannot thank you enough, and it has been so honorable to be able to have you here and to listen to you again. As I said, you are like the Pope in the field of business management. Your work is absolutely amazing. And I think many of us in this forum today knows that. Some are researching on dynamic capability and would love to learn more. So don't miss the chance to sign up. October 18th is the start. We start the course. It will be very easy for you, online, virtual. very digested in 2 hours for 2 days each, so 4 hours in total. So with that, David, thank you very much.